Welcome to Adventures in Landlording, where we sit in blue chairs and gab about all the trials and tribulations of rental property management. I'm Jonathan, and I'm joined here, as always, by Krista.
Hello.
How's it going, Krista?
It's another beautiful day in paradise.
It sure is. It sure is. The leaves are changing.
Thank goodness.
The heat is not heating as much.
Yeah. I could even go a titch cooler, but
Could you?
I could.
I think it's coming.
Oh, I really hope so. Fingers firmly crossed.
All right, let's hop in. Our first story comes from Reddit, and it was posted by a user named Soggy Passage 2852. The title is How to Improve Tenant Retention. And I think we have some thoughts. So here's what the post says. I want to improve tenant retention because sometimes it genuinely feels like an uphill battle. The rising rents and competition in the market makes it almost impossible to satisfy tenants nowadays. I had 2 renters move out within a year. So I was wondering if there are any tips for regular check-ins or incentives that can keep tenants invested for longer. Specifically, I want to improve my communication with them and maintain maintenance requests smoothly. Thanks in advance. Boy, do we have some thoughts. I'll let you go first, Krista.
Well, first, I want to applaud this approach. I think tenant retention is really critical, not only for, a rental property management business's long-term success, but also it shows that there's some goodwill between landlord and tenant. We're all about that goodwill.
Absolutely.
And there's so many different ways that you can go about this that don't require you as a landlord to bend over backwards or radically get involved in your tenant's life in a way that perhaps they would not want. First and foremost, communication is at the heart of everything. We are big fans of communication.
Sure are.
Giant fans. So having an all-in-one platform, perhaps TurboTenant.com, where you can make sure that you host all of your communication and that they understand your expectations for communication would be my first step.
Absolutely.
Get in there, set it up. It's free to use. And that way, all of your messages are very easily sent and received in one easy to function spot.
Nailed it.
Thank you.
Perfect.
I'm a professional. Flawless.
So we know this person, Soggy Passage, is in Missouri, but we know nothing else about their property, about the renters, about their rental price. We don't know anything, right? So let's just assume everything they're doing in their business is out of whack. I would start with, are your rentals priced correctly? Because if they're not, if they're too high, that is definitely going to be a reason your renters are skedaddling earlier than you would like. We actually have a rent estimate tool on our website, and we'll drop the link below. It is totally free. You plug in your address, you say, tell me how much rentals are going for in my area, and it looks at comparable properties based on bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, etc. And it gives you a range. So it doesn't say, here's what you should go for, but it gives you a range. And if you're too high, that's going to be a red flag. People are probably not going to stick around for very long, especially if you are on the higher end and your property is not very nice. So they could look at other rentals in the area and see, are they the only one who doesn't have a carport or a garage? Are they the only one who doesn't have a fenced-in yard or nice countertops or updated flooring or a fridge or a washer and dryer? I don't know. There's a lot of things that they may be missing that their renters after a little while will say, you know what, I've had enough.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Another great spot to learn about what people are doing well in your local community is, of course, local real estate investor groups. So you could definitely hop in and ask them what's working well, what kind of investments they've put into their properties recently, how that's paid off.
Going back to communication, if your tenants are moving out earlier than you would like, why don't you ask them why? Why don't you just say, what was it? What was it about the property? We do a thing at TurboTenant when you use us for rent payments. Every month that your tenant pays rent, we say, how are things going in the property? And it's just a very simple thumbs up, thumbs down. It is very nice to proactively get these conversations going. So even if they're in the middle of a lease, that's their opportunity to say, you know what? The kitchen sink's been leaking for a while and it wasn't a big deal, but because you asked, I'll tell you about it. And in this situation, that probably would have been a great thing to prompt somewhere along the way where they could say, here are the issues I'm having. And then the landlord can have the opportunity to hopefully fix them. It sounds like this person is interested in fixing them. They just don't know what they are.
I think that also flows really well into the idea of making sure your maintenance process is as easy as possible. Ultimately, you benefit as the property owner when your tenants can simply put in whatever's going wrong and you have a chance to address it sooner rather than later. And so they had requested some tips on that as well. Jonathan, I'm curious, what would you tell someone who is looking to manage maintenance requests more smoothly?
Oh boy. Well, have a system for it, I think is the first starting point. We actually do have in TurboTenant a way to track maintenance requests and a way to actually send that work order straight over to your handyman, whoever they are. We even have a partnership called Lula, which if it's available in your area, you can send everything over to Lula and they will actually triage it with your tenant, which can be a very nice way, especially if you're out of state, to get that stuff just handled very quickly, keep everybody happy. But yeah, I'd say the most important thing is to communicate expectations. Say it's a bigger problem than you or your tenant initially thought. Just talk with them about it. Our last episode of this show, we actually talked about a tenant who had 80,000 bees in her walls. That was a crazy one. And in that case, the landlord just basically gave up communicating. They were just like, wow, that's a lot of bees. And then they went silent.
Truly, none of our business. But no, that communication piece is so critical. I would also say set expectations and then meet or exceed them.
Yeah.
So if you come to me and you're like, hey, Krista, there are 80,000 bees in the wall, I would say, okay, that is a very important problem. I am going to investigate. I will follow up with you within the next 3 hours with next steps. I might not have the complete solution mapped out, but we will work on this together and make sure that you actually follow up with what you tell them. That is critical to building a good relationship with your tenants, and ultimately that will help tenant retention.
Absolutely. And just to hit this communication piece home a little more, it goes beyond maintenance, right? Like say these tenants are moving out early because, or not early, but moving out when their lease is over because the neighbors are super loud. It's not exactly a maintenance request situation, but it is an issue for somebody who's living there who expects quiet habitability. And again, if they're not telling you about it, or if you're not asking to hear what the issue is, then you can't fix it. So starting with what is the problem, and then maybe you can talk to your neighbors about how you'd like it if they didn't drum in the middle of the night.
Worst case scenario, you put 80,000 bees in there, they won't be drumming again.
From finding your new favorite tenant to automating rent collection, TurboTenant has all the tools you need to thrive as a landlord. Get started for free at landlordpod.com today. All right, Krista, on to our next segment. What do you got for us?
Get ready. Really steel yourself because this is bonkers.
Okay.
The title of this story, Squatting on the Squatter.
Oh, we love it.
We love it. It comes to us from Fox 2 Detroit. Inherently, a property owner was looking to sell one of her vacant buildings only to find that there was a squatter living there. And unfortunately, the property owner and the squatter got into a bit of a kerfuffle. The squatter said that the property owner tried to run her over with her car, and then the property owner got arrested. Sorry, vehicular violence is not funny, but the way that this all kind of tumbled down is, we gotta laugh a little.
Yeah.
Luckily, the property owner was found innocent. She did not try and run over the squatter, but the squatter moved back into the property, and because of this back and forth, reporter Charlie Leduff decided to step in. So he interviewed the property owner. We'll show a clip or two of that.
May I have your permission to enter your domicile?
You have my permission.
May I have the keys?
Sure can.
So maybe you're a squatter trying to outmaneuver a squatter.
My attorney has the papers that says it's my house.
Well, I brought my bathrobe. I think I'm gonna go move in. Come with me.
So as you saw there, he got the actual proper lease from the property owner, talked to her lawyer, did the whole shebang. He then decided to don a bathrobe and go to the property itself, lease in hand, key in hand. You can see him approaching the squatter, and he inherently says, What's for dinner? I am coming in the door. So they have a bit of a back and forth where they're trying to prove who has the right to the property. He points out that they are currently stealing electricity.
Power hooked up legit there.
My power is
That's not legit.
is not legit.
No, you stealing a bit of power.
I am blessed.
Bold blessings abound, but inherently the squatter ends up pulling out a piece of mail that they had received as their proof of residency. The police followed very shortly thereafter, and the squatter was arrested and taken out of the property. So there are quite a few layers to this situation.
Sure
What are your initial takes?
My initial take is that this reporter actually didn't do anything.
Yeah.
It like, as you mentioned, there were all the pieces were there, and maybe the police weren't acting, and only having the local film crew there is, what got them to act. But really, it was the police just showing up and arresting this person.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a lot of it. There are some really interesting legal bits and bobs in this story that I'm sure folks are picking up on. If not, don't worry, we are here to do that for you. I will say first and foremost, squatters get a ton of coverage in the news.
They do.
It's scary, right? But most of you do not need to be afraid of it. If you have a ton of properties that are sitting vacant, maybe have a prick of fear in your heart. That's for you to decide. But everyone else, most of you are not having these units that are just sitting there doing nothing, because that means you're likely losing money on them. Do you have any advice for someone who might have quite a few vacant properties in their portfolio and what they might do for this?
I do. Yeah. First of all, most landlords watching this are going to say, why would my rental property ever be vacant, right? Because that is a cash drain. You don't want that. However, it does happen. Maybe you just go on a really long vacation and you didn't want to get anybody in there. I don't know. If they are vacant for a significant amount of time, take some measures to try and stop squatters, right? Install cameras. I say it on just about every segment of this show, but security cameras are great, so long as they're not infringing on anybody's privacy. And if you're installing them inside your vacant property that you own, there's nothing wrong with that. Having cameras there would help a lot to let you know that people are not, in fact, living within what you thought was a vacant unit. But the other thing is that having a signed lease agreement in place will supersede anybody's rights to squat on your property. So if I was going to be gone for 6 months and I said, hey, Krista, do you want to be my tenant living here? The rent's going to be $0 a month and we're going to have you live here until we both decide to end the lease. That would pretty much cover my bases, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and it'd be a great deal for me. So it's a win-win. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're so right. When you have a signed lease agreement, that is going to be the clencher in terms of preventing squatters, hopefully. But also, if you do get a squatter, that is how folks are getting them out. There is a very famous squatter hunter, Flash Shelton, who is inherently using this strategy. He first did it with his mom's property, and now he is building a nationwide business where he is hunting out squatters and using signed leases to reclaim the property for the property owners.
Yeah.
So it really does work. I will say, TurboTenant does not advise confronting squatters on a one-to-one basis. Please always make sure that you involve the police and that you are staying safe. We are not about violence here at TurboTenant.
No, and like, these are, especially Flash Shelton, awesome name.
Yeah.
Chris actually wrote a blog about his story, which we'll link below if you're curious to read more. What he's doing is not advisable from a legal standpoint. There are, of course, many ways where this could go wrong, because if you think about what kind of person would be comfortable squatting in a property they don't own, don't rent, don't have any right to be on, it could lead to violence. It could lead to a bunch of other bad things. So, yeah, we definitely do not condone vigilante justice of any sort in the face of squatters. But yeah, I think Flash Shelton is kind of an interesting case of he's going in there. He even offers like consultations now to help give you advice, I guess.
You're totally right. I mean, do not become your own Flash Shelton. One, I don't think the world can handle that many flashes. And two, you don't have to go to extremes to implement this knowledge. Just like Jonathan said, if you are worried, that you have a long vacancy coming up, take some precautions. One, I'd say if you are a remote landlord, make sure that you have someone in the area who's willing to just drive by. Common signs of squatters are going to be cars that you don't recognize in the driveway. This one is a little bit harder, but mail being received at the house where no one is living. So what you can do, of course, is one, install those security cameras. It's important. You will feel more secure. Your property will feel more secure. It's a win-win all around. But also, I would say if you can have automatic light changers go off and set a schedule so it looks like someone's there, that's going to help deter anyone from breaking in and starting to squat. If by some chance you do accrue a squatter, again, use your rights as a property owner to set up a lease agreement with someone else. That lease agreement is going to supersede the squatter's rights. Be in touch with your attorney and your local police officers, and they can help you transition the property back into your possession.
Absolutely. Yeah. And taking it back to this story while we wrap up here, there were other things happening here, like stealing electricity, that just is blatantly illegal. Squatters' rights are a thing in every state. I know a lot of states wish they weren't. I know a lot of landlords wish they weren't. But stealing electricity is stealing electricity. So that is, I think, where it just became a very cut and dry story, to be honest.
Very cut and dry. I will say too, squatters' rights require years of possessing the property before they fully own it. So act as soon as you have anything that's sticking up for you as a red flag. Most landlords do not encounter squatters. If you have a squatter story, though, we would love to hear it in the comments down below.
Let us know.
Do you know who's really moving in? You can, using TurboTenant's comprehensive tenant screening report. Your applicants will even cover the tab. Get started today at landlordpod.com.
Okay, our final segment is one that we like to call the Landlord Special.
Landlord Special.
This is a segment in which we highlight an especially bad landlord so that you may learn from their misgivings and be better. This story comes from the New York Times. It is titled, "Landlord is Ordered to Jail Again Over Problems in His Buildings." So this is a story about a New York City landlord, Daniel Oheb Shalom, nailed it, who served a 60-day sentence on Rikers Island, but officials and tenants say he still has not fixed his apartments. So this is kind of a crazy story because this guy went to Rikers Island, which is, I'm not a prison aficionado, but I know that one's pretty intense.
Pretty intense.
And he went there because his buildings, his rental properties were in such terrible disrepair, which is a wild thing to go to prison for. But also, while he has been in prison, he apparently was ordered to address the problems in his buildings, which they say he has not done. So crazy. That's
Absolutely crazy.
And when we say disrepair in his buildings, I mean, it's bad. It's really like ceilings falling in, leaks, cockroach infestations, mold. Really, I mean, he's a slumlord. He's a total slumlord.
Oh, 10,000%. I think one of the worst parts is that he seems to be doing this as a strategy to drive out people who currently are protected under rent regulations.
Yes.
So it's extra gross because he wants to sell the buildings, turn a profit. So he's like, okay, well, what if a ceiling falls on you? You don't want to live here now. But little does he know that the rent in New York is so high that some people will have to stay.
Yeah, there was a quote from one of his tenants who does interior renovations, kind of ironic here, and teaches tennis, who said he pays about $900 a month for a one-bedroom apartment. "Why should I move?" he said. "It's hard to find affordable housing." Which, we've covered slumlords before on this show. I'm sure we will again, because unfortunately, they're out there. This is such an unfortunate situation for this tenant and for all the other tenants who cannot afford to go anywhere else. I mean, $900 a month, and this is in Washington Heights. I'm sure that's very cheap for that area. But the ceiling is falling in.
Yeah.
So another tenant says that they've dealt with decades of neglect from this landlord, and including heat and hot water outages in winter, and that the ceilings have almost collapsed. So again, this bad places. There are no pictures in here to show us how terrible.
Oh, don't worry. I've got some pictures.
You've got some
for
pictures.
You.
Okay.
Let's flash them up.
Oh boy.
It's nasty. So nasty that one of the charges is the endangering the welfare of a child, which is egregious. I just don't understand. And I always say this, but like, how do you sleep at night? Like,
Yeah.
Daniel, what the hell? There are actual people suffering through this. And he also took steps to try and cover up the fact that he owned these buildings. So he filed false documents to say, oh no, these couldn't be my buildings. I'm not responsible for any of this. And that's why he's on Rikers Island.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. There was a separate criminal case for harassing rent-regulated tenants with horrific living conditions in order to induce them to vacate their apartments and enable him to sell the buildings for significant profit, said the Manhattan district attorney. So, I mean, this is an especially egregious slumlord. Normally, it does not escalate to the point of, being in Rikers Island and having the Manhattan DA talk about how bad you are. We covered another slumlord a few episodes ago who was in, I think it was Tennessee. She was bad. And when given the opportunity to say like, oh, I feel terrible, I'm going to fix these, she didn't. She doubled down on like, I'm making money, which I'm sure is how Daniel feels, where he's like, whatever, I own properties in Manhattan, so clearly I'm going to make bank when I can sell them. But in the meantime, he's being a very terrible person, and thankfully is serving time for being a terrible person, but he still has not fixed the problems. So don't be a Daniel.
Don't be a Daniel. Or
right.
else.
Or else. Chris is going to come for you.
I've got the address.
Well, that is it for this episode of Adventures in Landlording. Make sure to subscribe on your podcast player of choice and on YouTube. If you have any feedback or you want to share your own adventure in landlording, check us out at landlordpod.com.